Yeah, sure.
Yeah, hey, thanks everyone for joining this webinar on testing two-factor authentication. How are we currently doing it, and what is the better way of doing testing the two-factor authentication? So let's move on to the list of contents. Now, first and foremost, we'll try and understand what is authentication and how does it differ from authorization, because most people are confused about what is authentication and how is it different from authorization. Then we move on to talking about two-factor authentication, what is it, and then we discuss what is multi-factor authentication and how easy it is to either hack two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication for that matter. Then we try and understand why two-factor authentication is still most used among all the businesses and companies. And then we move on to trying to understand how is it being currently tested? Is it really feasible economically the way it is being tested? What are the negatives of the current approach? And then we move on to saying, okay, here's a better approach, and we will show you that better approach, right? So this whole webinar is centered around how a QA engineer can go ahead and test the two-factor authentication. Right. So we are not going to talk about how to deploy or develop a two-factor authentication system, but we try and talk about how to test it. And are we really doing it right today? Is my team really testing two-factor authentication today, or are we just pushing it till the point it goes into production? So we talk about these things, and then we head out to Q&A section where we have selected a few questions that have been sent to us by our registrants, and we answer those questions, right? So in between, if my voice is not audible, please do let me know. Thank you. So moving on to the first slide. So we will just start with a simple video which explains the idea of how passwords are so hackable, right?
Mahesh, the voice is very low. Can you increase the volume?
Oh yeah, 1 second. I'll just rerun the video.
Yeah.
We're talking about cybersecurity today and how safe people's passwords are. What is one of your online passwords currently?
It is my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school.
What kind of dog do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Papillon.
And what's its name?
Jameson.
Jameson. And where'd you go to school?
I went to school back in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
What school?
Hempfield Area Senior High School.
Oh, when did you graduate?
In 2009.
Oh, great.
Gemma. 1, 2, 3. Spells G. More Italian.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Like what's a good Italian password?
My grandma's name.
What's your grandma's name?
Maria.
Maria. So Maria is your password?
Oh yeah, now you know my password. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So yesterday I was looking at the statistics on the most used phrases or most used passwords in 2020 and 2021, and what I found was the most used password was password. So that's why we have authentication. That's why we talk about two-factor authentication, and that's why we talk about multi-factor authentication, because most of the passwords that are being used today are just simply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it's simply password, right? So moving on to what is the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is a way to confirm if you are what you are claiming to be. You are a person who has the actual, who is actually the right person to be using that feature or using that product. And that is what authentication is, right? The first step is always authentication, and then the second step is always authorization. When you enter into a product or enter into an application, then do you have the authorization to use a certain module? For example, if you're a financial analyst, do you have access to sending money, receiving money, or looking at people's data, right? That is authorization, right? So it's very important to understand what is the difference between authentication and authorization so that we can go ahead in this discussion to understand what is 2FA, two-factor authentication, and then we'll talk about how to test it. Right. So I'll just play a simple video that we have on what two-factor authentication is. Going to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. Apologies for that. So talking about two-factor authentication, we have one layer of password and another layer is something that you have. It can be an OTP through an SMS, or it can be an OTP that is sent, or a key phrase that is sent through an email, right? And today Testsigma is doing both. You can test both an SMS-based OTP as well as an email-based OTP with Testsigma. So moving on to what is multi-factor authentication. So if you see if you check the diagram on the left-hand side, right, you understand why we really need all these sorts of authentication, right? Most people, like I use my Netflix account, and my password is also with my friends. A lot of us share a lot of passwords with each other, right? And that is exactly why we need something called multi-factor authentication also. It's basically composed of a first layer of password or a PIN or a KBA. KBA is nothing but a knowledge-based authentication. You are asked a couple of questions. Where were you born? What is your what was your mother's maiden name, and such questions. What was your first pet's name, right? So then the second type, it can be something that you have, like or something that you are, like fingerprints, retinal patterns, or voice, or it can be face detection, right? The third one is what you already have. It can be a bracelet. We used to use a secure ID, which was disconnected from the internet. It was called the most safest sort of authentication, but still it is also easily hackable, right? You can also use something like a Google Authenticator as a second level of authentication, and that too can be hacked. There's nothing that can't be hacked, right? So we move on to multi-factor authentication again. So we have, it can also be location based. So if you do a financial transaction today, and if that transaction is going far away from your behavioral trait, for example, if I make a buy, like if I buy an iPhone worth 1 lakh or 2 lakh rupees, then that transaction gets flagged. So that falls under the location-based multi-factor authentication, if you see on the left-hand side. So basically, in multi-factor authentication, we make the user to add more and more layers of protection. Like for example, if I want to perform a stock trade on an app today, like in the Indian market, if I want to buy a stock or if I want to sell a stock, then I have to first add a T pin and then an M pin and then a password and then another password and then an OTP, right? But why we really don't use multi-factor authentication a lot these days? When you try to order something on Zomato, you have to log in either only with an OTP. They will not ask you for a multi-factor authentication, right? So businesses don't want users to use multi-factor authentication because it's very hard for people to use 3-4 layers of authentication. So if you want me to remember my first pet's name, it's going to be okay. But if you want me to remember something else, like my school's something else's name, it becomes humanly impossible to remember all these things. And it takes more time to authenticate to enter into your app, right? So, and that's where you lose a lot of business, and that's where people have still not shifted onto the idea of having a multi-factor authentication system for an app, right? Mostly in the B2C sector, we don't usually use this unless it's a financial app, something like a stock trading app or a cryptocurrency app, where you want your users to be who they really are, right? So this is where we are different in multi-factor authentication. Now, most of the teams today do not really test the two-factor authentication features on their apps. They don't test it because there is really no feasible, economically feasible way. I say economically feasible because the biggest thing that we consider while we deploy our testing systems is cost. We cannot over budget ourselves. We cannot go outside of that budget, right? So is it economically feasible to have a system that tests your two-factor authentication to its fullest? I'm not saying just perform that action. I'm talking about test the whole feature to its fullest so as to understand that that feature, that's a two-factor authentication system, is actually functioning the way it should function. So we go in the coming slides. In the coming slides, we talk about what is it that this two-factor authentication, what is it supposed to do? What should be a use case for a test engineer to test the two-factor authentication? Is it just taking that password and putting it in that place and then finishing that case? It's not that, right? The acceptance criteria has to be something else. It has to be something more complicated, right? So we think like someone who will be able to hack the system, and in that way we'll be able to write a use case. We'll see that later. So the biggest risk of not testing two-factor authentication, you can see it on your screen. The CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey's account, was hacked in 2019, and that was big news, right? And lots of tweets and unpleasant messages were added to his account, and that was not really good. So this is just one news that we can see. What happens when you really don't test your two-factor authentication in your staging or pre-staging or in your production servers, right? We'll do it tomorrow is a recipe for a disaster. You don't test it today, your users are going to fail tomorrow, right? We'll go ahead. So how is it really being tested today? Are there really any frameworks to test the two-factor authentication? So what do you really need to test this? You need an additional phone. You need that phone to be always available. You need to go pick up that SMS from that phone. You need to have a way of extracting that phone. You cannot do this on the cloud. You cannot. Your phone always has to be connected to your machine to fetch that OTP, right? So if we don't do it that way, if we want to test it generically on a server on the cloud, how do we do it? So today we have a very simple way of doing it. Not a simple way. The way I see it, it's a weak way of testing it. Nobody prefers to use it because one, it's expensive, it's not economically feasible. Two, it takes a lot of programmatical knowledge to understand this. Three, it doesn't really work all the time. It just works once or twice, right? So the code that you see on my screen, so this is a code that is usually written to integrate an Twilio SDK onto your application. And then you have to know your programming language. You have to literally know everything about, this code is written in Python, so you need to know Python. You need to know how REST APIs work. To extract that code out of your SMS, you have to know regex, right? So it's quite complicated to integrate all of these systems. And is it really, does it really make sense to be doing all this to test your 2FA? Because it is time consuming, it's expensive, it's really not, right? So this is a very complicated way of testing your 2FA. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and see how we make it very simple in Testsigma. And within, I'd say within under a minute, you can write a simple test, which goes ahead and fetches an OTP from a mobile number that we provide to you at no additional cost. So in this current way of testing, there is a cost. That cost is every single time you send an SMS, there is a cost attached to it, right? You take the Twilio SDK for that matter, you have to pay some charge every month for utilizing their services, which is quite expensive, right? Because you, as a QA engineer, you have to send multiple SMSs out at constant intervals, at infrequent intervals, to test if that application is really working or not. And for most companies, this is not a feasible way of testing the 2FA, right? Because it requires a lot of knowledge also at the same time. So going into the demo, so what we'll do is first we'll take you through a simple demo of how Testsigma works, how you can write a simple test case. So I'll just show you how to automate a simple login functionality. And once that is done, we'll move on to showing you how within under a minute's time, we can write a test case for a two-factor authentication functionality and run it and also see the results, right? So you don't need an additional phone. You don't need to know how to extract the information from there, and it's not expensive. I mean, with a Testsigma account, it just comes free, sort of, right? So let's go on to the demo. I'll just take you through, take you to the Testsigma application where I will write a simple test case for an application called the Demo Orange HRM application. We'll just show you that. Okay, give me a moment. Yeah, so this is the application that we're going to test, right? So we just have a username, password, and a login button. We'll just enter admin here, enter admin123 in the password place, and then we'll just click on login. So how easy is it to create a test case within Testsigma? So step one, we go and record all the UI identifiers, right? The UI identifier is nothing but a locator for every element on a web page. So you have buttons, you have input fields, you have text areas. So all these things will have a unique locator within the application, and this we will record it as a UI identifier. So these can be an XPath or an ID or a class name or something like that. So let's go ahead and record. We'll just click on record and start recording it. So all I have to do is just click on this element. My username element is recorded. Text password, it is recorded. Login button. Now I have a login button too, so I'll just save it, right? So now go back to my application and stop recording. So I have the UI identifiers, basically locators for three elements. One is username field, one is text password, and we have login button as well. So we'll go ahead into the test cases page, and we'll create a simple test case. I'll show you how quickly you can create a test case. Login demo. So you can also attach an assignee to it or a requirement to it. You can add a priority, make it critical or something like that, medium critical. Status can be ready if you have to run a test right now, right? You can also choose the type for that test case. Now let me just create this test case. Okay, so I need the URL for this application. So I'll just pick it up from here. Right, so now Testsigma servers can access this URL. That's great. So now all we have to do is we just type enter, and the NLPs show you a list of NLPs. The application shows you a list of NLPs which can be utilized. You don't have to write any piece of code here to test this application. So we will just say enter test data in UI identifier field. We have already recorded the UI identifier. Now I just delete the test data placeholder and click on place, what is that, plain text. So I need admin to be entered as the username, and I want username as the UI identifier. So click create. Now I will click on enter password. So I need to enter the password, enter test data in the UI identifier field. Again, I repeat the same. So in the place of password, let me enter admin123, and UI identifier, I'll just choose text password, create. And now I just want to click on the UI identifier. Let me check what happened. Okay, click on UI identifier. So I will choose the login button. Okay, so to visually see if we have really logged in or what is happening, sometimes the application doesn't log in. So we'll just wait for like 5 seconds. Wait for test data seconds. Okay, so 5 and create. So now I have my test case ready, and it's been less than under a minute, right? So I will just run this test case on, we can either run it on local devices or Testsigma Lab. I'm going to run it on Testsigma Lab on a Windows 10, Google Chrome browser version 91. I'm not going to change anything. I'll change one thing here. I'll just add screenshots to all the different steps that get executed, not just the fail steps. So now let's click on run now. So it's this simple to write a test case and to run it. And within seconds, you'll also get the results. You can also have a look at how results can be analyzed within the Testsigma application. So once this test case gets done, we move ahead to our second priority, that is creating a test case for testing the two-factor authentication functionality, right? So now talking about the two-factor authentication functionality, is it okay? Is it just enough if you test? Okay, let's just have a look at the results. So what is more important? You need to see if admin123 was entered. Okay, let me maximize this. Okay, this is a screenshot for the step that enters the password, right? So it has entered the password successfully and all the steps have passed. Let's see what happens over here. Okay, I have entered the wrong password, but that's okay. But the step has passed because admin123 has been inserted and the login button has clicked. So my test has right now passed. So now we go ahead and write a functionality for the two-factor authentication. Let me move on to a different project. Hey guys, I hope the screen is visible and my voice is audible. If not, please do let me know. Two-factor authentication. Okay, let's go ahead into the two-factor authentication place. Okay, so for the purpose of saving some time, I've already recorded the UI identifiers for this test case. So what I'm going to do is I will just simply write a new test case, create, right? Testing, testing the two-factor auth system. Let me put that into camel case. I'll also write a simple description here. So this will help anybody who wants to read the description later. I'm not going to go here into show advanced options. Okay, let's just create this, right? So let me show you what I'm going to test. So this is a Salesforce application. I have created a separate new instance for myself within the Salesforce application. This is going to be our URL. So let me just, okay, that's okay. Let me just show you. So in the password field, I'm just going to type the password and I'll click on the login. Is it going to, okay, I think, open this in a different, so I've already logged into this application several times and that cache is already there within the application. So one second, let me just try opening this in a different, in a new incognito mode browser. New incognito window. Okay. Got it. Okay. So let me just copy my username from here. So I'm entering my username and my password. This is a separate instance that I've created for Salesforce, right? So I just click on the login button and it takes me to a page where it asks me for a verification code. I have already attached a telephone number, I mean, a mobile number to this account. And the moment I do this, a message will be sent to this number. So this is a simple test case that we are going to write right now. And I have already captured the UI identifiers for this test case just so that we save on 1 or 2 minutes of time, right? So let me close this. Okay, now navigate to, I have saved the links over here. Now click create once test machines are able to access this. So the timer begins right now. Let's see how long it takes to create a test case to test a two-factor authentication functionality, right? So we just say enter. Once again, we just choose the enter test data in the identifiers field. Let me pick my username out of here. And in the UI identifiers, let's choose your username, create. I'm losing some time also because I'm typing, I'm standing right now. I have a standing desk. So plain text. Right now, I'm exposing my password to this service, but in an ideal situation, we wouldn't do this. We have a test data profile section from where the encrypted password would be inserted into this test case. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm using my password directly in here, and I'm going to delete my account as soon as this webinar gets over, right? Click on. So we need to click on the login. Click on login. I hope this is the one. Okay, once this is done, I'll just give it a wait for around 5 seconds, just so that we allow the Salesforce application to load, right? Then we have enter test data. So now I have to enter the verification code into that input field. So for that, what I do is I choose the function drop down from here, and a list of functions pop out from the right hand side. So I will just choose phone number from here. Let's see, phone, get OTP. So get OTP is a function that we are looking for. So in here, you need to give a regex. That's a regular expression. It's a very simple regular expression that's /d, flower brackets open and close, 4,8, right? So we can talk about this a little later maybe. So I'm just going to give it a small timeout of 30 seconds, and I'll just hit create. So I just chose a phone number, and it's already available in the drop down. You should observe that how simple and easy it is to create this test case, right? So once this is done, I will also click on UI identifier, which is supposed to be, let me see, I think it is, okay, I have not added it here. One second, verify OTP, update. I had not added the UI identifier there. So click on UI identifier and save OTP. Give me a moment, create. So that's it. So let's also add another wait just to see that end screen, right? Wait for, I just want to know once the login happens, let me give it a 10-second wait. Am I being navigated into the dashboard? So I have the complete test case, 8 steps. UI identifiers, locators have also been inserted, right? So let's see how it works. I'm going to run this test case on the default settings. That's Google Chrome 91 on Windows 10. Let me just change this to all steps and run now. So we were talking about two-factor authentication and what is more important. Is it just about entering? So in this test case, all I'm doing is entering the OTP onto a field and then just saying, okay, this functionality works. But that is just a very basic use case for testing the two-factor authentication, right? So when we talk about two-factor authentication, let me show you my slide that I have. So if you are a QA engineer and you have an application, you work on an application which has the two-factor authentication as a feature, then is it just enough to just enter the OTP and let it go? Once, let's just wait for this result. So this is taking a little more time only because the SMS has to go from the SMS gateway and has to be received onto that phone number, and it takes time for that to happen. Okay, so now this test is also passed completely. So the first thing that I like to do here is to go to step 6 and see if the OTP has been added or not, right? Let's have a look at the screenshot. Okay, so the OTP has been added, 51584. OTP got extracted from the telephone number that I have given, and it has gone and it has been inserted into this place. Let's see what happened after that. Right? Okay, you see this dashboard. I can see the dashboard here. So that means the two-factor authentication was successful in this case. I can also watch the video over here as to how this whole thing took place. Right? Let's have a look at the story and how the application behaved during this test case. We are around 4 minutes out for time. Okay, you see now it's going to add the verification code which has been extracted from the telephone number. 51584. Okay, great. So I just demoed to you 2 different test cases. One is how to create a simple test case, and 2 is how to test a basic two-factor authentication feature, right? So is this enough? It is in no way enough, because all I did was just to say, okay, I was able to extract some 4 number OTP from somewhere, and I put it into an input field, right? That is not enough, because we have to, when we test the two-factor authentication system, the most important thing is to check the rate limit. Does your 2-step authentication feature come with a rate limit? Have your developers added that functionality? So what is rate limit? right? So assume that today I have an application where I am adding the verification code, but I'm a hacker and I don't really know the OTP. So what I will do is I'll choose to use a brute force technique, and I'll go on requesting for OTPs, and I'll go on trying for more and more OTPs, right? If it's a 4-digit PIN, then I say 0000 up to 9999. So considering the amount of processing speed that we have right now with the AWSs and the Google Cloud platforms of the world, we have now the capability of using GPUs and TPUs. So I can run a brute force algorithm for a 4-digit code within a matter of seconds, right? So to prevent this, what is your application even doing? So if a user sends multiple requests, is your application blocking it? So that is what is more important for a QA engineer to check. And that is quite possible. You can automate a test case like this with Testsigma in a very easy way within, I just showed you within minutes, right? So that's the first use case. Second use case, you have a rate limit set. Your developer has set a rate limit onto your two-factor authentication feature, but is it possible that I bypass that rate limit? So that's the second question, right? So your feature is generating a 4-digit code over and over again, but that 4-digit code is same every single time. This has happened to me. Probably this has happened to you as well, right? Some applications do this. They send you the same OTP over and over again after a certain interval of time. If you click on get OTP or resend OTP, it'll send you the same OTP. Even the next time you send a request, it'll send you the same OTP. So is that also happening with your application? So you need to test that you have to keep polling, you have to keep redoing the same task, and that's very much possible with Testsigma, right? So I'm just taking one more use case here, which is how changing an IP address can also help you break the two-factor authentication feature. But there are a number of use cases, right? There are a number of use cases which can be automated. Just because of the shortage of time, we're not talking about everything else. If you need more information, you can get in touch with us at support@testsigma.com, or you can also write to me at mahesh@testsigma.com. So let's talk about how, if your two-factor authentication is connected to an IP address, right? As I said, if it's a 4-digit code, I can run a brute force algorithm, and I can start with 0000 and go up to 9999. Assume that your two-factor authentication feature is connected to an IP address, right? So the moment I run the same, if I send another request from a different IP address, then ideally your application should block me, right? Assume I'm a hacker. I will, if you are giving me 4 different chances to enter the OTP, then I have 10,000 divided by 4. That's around 2,500 times. If I change the IP address from where I am sending out the request, then I will be able to easily get into your system within 2,500 iterations of, changing the IP address. So it's as simple as that to break your two-factor authentication feature. So this is where QA engineers come in. We have to know exactly what is happening behind the scene, behind the code. Does your the feature that has been written by your developer, does that really have a rate limit? If there is no rate limit, raise a red flag. If there is a rate limit but you are able to bypass it, then raise a red flag, right? So there are other different techniques in which you can also other use cases that you can add here. Something called you can have a test case for memorization. You can have cookies. You can also do tests for cookies. Like you can also, what you can also do is copy a part of that request from a different, copy a part of your request header or request from a different request and send it out in a new request. And if the first time it worked, the second time also it works, right? So these are ways you can hack onto your two-factor authentication feature. But a QA engineer also needs to know all of these things to be able to write effective test cases. And most importantly, it has to be economically feasible. It shouldn't consume a lot of time. It should be easy to automate, right? And that Testsigma supports that. Now, we have just spoken about use cases. I think that's the last part. We have also received a couple of questions and answers from are registrants. So we'll be talking about these. We'll go to question number 1. So what are the pros and cons of having a framework which supports API, UI, mobile, and performance testing all at one place? Pros, I mean, if you ask a developer, he would say, I would like everything in one system. I don't want to have multiple systems, right? I don't want to have one set of code kept somewhere for REST API automation and one set of code kept somewhere only for UI. It's difficult to maintain different pieces of code. But if you're a QA engineer, it makes sense to be modularizing your code, right? So every system has its own pros and cons. What we would always prefer is to have a logical separation. Like what Testsigma does is it has a logical separation. It is not like two repositories merged into one, right? Testsigma gives you that logical separation where you can access your UI, mobile, and your API, all of these testing features in the same application or a platform, I'd say, right? And we don't intermix code. I mean, I've been there, you've been there. We've all done that and we've all faced it. We have multiple pieces of code being fetched from different GitHub repositories, and it's very difficult to understand who wrote that piece of code and what it is doing right there, right? So pros and cons from our perspective. Going on to the second question, is your current approach contains 2FA with OTP on your mobile only, or email is also included? So email is also included. I didn't show you the demo right here because it takes a long time to be demoing everything and every feature. What I would suggest is you can connect with us, write an email to us at support@testsigma.com, or get in touch with one of us who can show you the demo, and so you can take it ahead, right? So the answer to that question is yes, email is also included. Multi-factor authentication, what happens if there are more than 2 factors? Absolutely. You can have 10 factors. You can have a fingerprint recognition. If you can have captcha. So somebody also asked a question on captcha. How do you automate captcha? It's quite simple to automate captcha as well. We will discuss that. So what about what if you have a fingerprint recognition, right? We can do it. Testsigma can do it. You give us a use case, we'll be able to do it, and we are working on it already. But the idea behind being able to test a fingerprint recognition system is that you don't do it. I mean, it has to be manual. But again, see, I'll tell you what the problem is with having a fingerprint recognition as one of your layers of authentication. So fingers are always damp, right? Most of our fingers are always damp. So you wash your hands here, you do something else. So most of the times, even my mobile phone is unable to recognize my own fingerprint, right? So this happens to most of us, and that's why we try to not use fingerprint authentication as one of our. I mean, go to any financial platform if you want to send money from your bank account. They will not ask you for a fingerprint recognition system because people are doing all sorts of things. People are kidnapping others and trying to, access their fingerprints. You talk about iris recognition. Iris recognition is quite simple and easy, but it's quite complicated and it doesn't work at all times, right? Voice recognition. If you want to enter a piece of your voice in a wave format onto your application so that it recognizes you, your voice changes. Your voice is different in the morning, it's different in the evening, it depends on your mood. So basically things don't work most of the times. You are logged out of your own application, it doesn't work, right? So we can test multi-factor authentication. Give us a use case and we'll show you a demo on how to do it, right? How to integrate or stimulate external device, an important question from a 2-factor authentication perspective. I just showed you a demo where you don't have to do anything. You just have to write the test case. We give you the phone number, we give you everything, we extract the message out of the phone, and it's quite simple. So you don't have to worry about integrating an external device onto your 2-factor authentication infrastructure, right? How to validate captcha in automation? We are doing it. It's quite simple. Our engineers have developed systems. We use OCR, optical character readers, to validate captcha. You need more information, I'd suggest get in touch with us at support@testsigma.com, and we'll be more than happy to help you out, right? How will it benefit future of AI-based automation? So AI-based automation runs on mostly neural networks and convolutional neural networks. And this is just a first step where you say, okay, I'm going to test two-factor authentication and ensure that two factors work, right? You can also add layers of convolutional networks to your own test feature if you are willing to do it, which will recognize the behavioral traits of a user, right? If I'm a user, as I said, if I'm making a transaction of worth a lot, which deviates from my current user behavior, then that gets flagged. So you can have a neural network do that, and integrate that into your testing infrastructure as well. So that way, it is going to benefit in the future, right? So the last question, I mean, this is something that I'm going to keep it as an open question for you. I've just shown you the demo for the this test case. I've shown you the feature. I've also informed you about the risks of not testing it, right? If not today, then when? When will you do it? Like companies have lost money in millions and millions of dollars because they didn't test the two-factor authentication, right? So should we even automate these test cases? From all the information that you've received during this session, answer this question. I hope that answer makes sense, right? So I think this is the last question that we have. Do you guys have any questions that my team can answer? Please let us know in the chat box. I hope my voice was audible.
Yeah. Great, Mahesh. Mahesh, there's one question which I'll take it in the chat. So yes, so we provide all the phone numbers. The question was like, so you guys, I mean, you have an option to take the phone numbers, and you're the one who's going to provide the phone numbers, and how is that information, the OTPs sent to this phone number are secure? Right. So these are like the dedicated accounts. The phone numbers that you're going to get is not shared with anyone else, as long as you are using it. And every account gets a dedicated phone number. That means like there's no way that others can see it. Others can see the OTPs that you are sending to that particular phone number. And second, the information that you are storing or the applications that you are automating using Testsigma are completely sealed or secured, that no one else can see it, including Testsigma team. Only you and your team will have access to it. So it's completely secure, and these are the dedicated phone numbers that you're not going to share with anyone else. Hope that answers your question. What about if system support Google Authenticator code only? Yeah, so Google Authenticator we're still working on it, but these are the 2-3 options that we have to authenticate the two-factor authentication. And of course, as Mahesh was saying, like, so we're still working on multi-factor authentication and other ways to authenticate, like the Google Authenticator is one of them, for sure. Very soon, like, we will have all that. So idea here is like, we really don't want the QA engineers to bypass any of these things, which is like really, really critical for an end user perspective, right? From an end user perspective. Yeah, so we'll slowly be adding all this into the system, so that like all our customers can use the platform in a real scenarios, the real time, and not real time, but like at least close to real time scenarios. So the next question here is, if the login is linked to our AD, how can we use random mobile number to automate the test? Okay. So these mobile numbers, as of now, there are 2 ways to link your mobile numbers. As of now, you can choose the mobile numbers like how many ever you want. And we would recommend you to add this mobile number to your AD, so that it will be easy to automate. So I mean, we all know that like it's always good to have a defined data and the defined the infra to get the expected results. So we would expect of course, we would expect you guys to the customers to add the mobile numbers in the AD, the first option. But if that's not something that you can, or like you would like to do, you can always write a custom function, just like you have get OTP, right? And if you see get OTP is like is where you're going to mention your phone number. But if you want to randomize it, you can go ahead and override that method, get OTP method, and enter your add your logic to get OTP from the random phone number. So that is possible. So by default, we would recommend you to use the Testsigma provided phone numbers and use the default functions. But there is always a way to override it and randomize it and get phone number or get OTPs from any of your mobile numbers, for example. Great. Do you provide standalone features so that it is easy to integrate with our testing framework? Unfortunately, no, as of now. So we are an end-to-end test automation platform. So we are trying to make our platform better, and I mean very soon, like we may have like the open source frameworks also. But at this point in time, like we are completely an end-to-end testing platform integrated with all these features. Like so we have not modularized it. So we are going to do it, but the timelines are not really clear yet at this point in time. How did Testsigma manage to capture OTP? Is there specific configuration required before test? No configuration required. It's as I said, like as Mahesh mentioned, like it's completely zero touch. You don't need anything. I mean, by default, you get a mobile number, and when you say get OTP, we have all the logic and infra required to get OTPs from the configured mobile numbers. So you really don't need anything. There is no prerequisite as such to use the OTP. So you can just go ahead and start building your tests and not worry about how to set up your infrastructure for OTP related authentications. Is there any additional cost on top of license to test out two-factor authentication? No, not really. I mean, so if you want to, like, so by default you get one number, and of course there's no limit on the number of messages, as Mahesh said. Like it comes at zero cost, and for you guys, if you're already a Testsigma customer, you can go ahead and enable it quickly and immediately and start using it. Yeah, there's no limit. There's no separate cost to it. Do you also take the next question here? Yeah, please send us the follow-up questions if you have any on the question answers that we are answers that we are giving here, and we'll be happy to take those as well. Do you also take care of locators, identifiers, maintenance? Let's say I have saved a test case, but then the identifier changed from latest deployment. So do you provide AI kind of stuff to change that saved identifier accordingly? Yes, I think Mahesh has already covered to some extent. Yes, so we have AI at like 2-3 different areas. Auto healing is one of them. Yeah, definitely. Like we do this. If there's any change at the identifier level, like you don't need to do it manually. The system will take care of it automatically. Good. Anything else? Feel free to send us questions here in Q&A. Like we'll be happy to. Mahesh, anything to add to any of those answers?
No, nothing from my side, yeah.
Yeah, good.
Kia, there are a couple of questions on the chat section as well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Do Testsigma supports BDD or Gherkin? Yes. So Testsigma's approach is very straightforward. I think you have already seen it. Mahesh has kind of already covered this part. This Testsigma is natural language based, which is close to BDD but not exactly BDD, or you can say Gherkin here. Yeah, so that's the approach that we follow. Like, and the reason is like we want to bring everyone on board. So if it is a BDD, maybe a quality analyst or automation engineer can understand easily. But if you go to this business people, like the business analyst or product managers, or even for that matter, quality analyst who is not familiar with automation testing, may find it very difficult. So we have kept this to natural language based because it is very close to how a manual test or a QA analyst test their applications or author their tests. and also it's easily understandable to everyone, and unified approach, right? Unified or common to everyone. So yes, so Testsigma supports natural language based. It is not BDD, it's not Gherkin. Like you can write your test on your own business lexicon. Does this mean I can hack someone else's account with Testsigma as long as I have their username and password? No, you need to. Yeah. So good question. So it's not that like Testsigma enable you to hack any other accounts, anyone's account. So it is a way to secure your account. So there is no way that you would be knowing their phone numbers, because I mean, yeah, it's not that you provide a random phone number and we can read SMSs from their phone, right? And so that's what, as I said in one of the questions that I answered before. So we give you the default phone numbers from which you can read OTPs. It's not that we can read OTPs from any of the phone numbers or anyone's phone number. So these are pre-defined, pre-configured phone numbers from which we can access the data. So as part of the other question that I answered, if you want to randomize these phone numbers, or if you want to change the phone numbers to your own phone numbers, so there is a small setup needed, and that is why I said like you need to write a small custom function to integrate Testsigma with your with your own phone numbers. Yes, no. The answer is no. You cannot, and the Testsigma doesn't facilitate or enables you to do that. So it is only to secure your own account, because these phone numbers are completely controlled in controlled environment. You cannot generalize it to any other phone numbers. How many dedicated phone numbers will test? Sorry. Yeah. How many dedicated phone numbers will Testsigma will provide? Yeah. So it depends on your requirement, and by default you will get one. But if you want more, you can always request for it. And so there is, I mean, of course, there will be a limit, but the limit is very high. So you can request for more phone numbers. Like if you have multiple accounts and if you have multiple people testing it, you can request for more phone numbers, as many as you want. And I mean, again, like if you have enterprise license, like there is no limit. But if you have limited licenses of Testsigma, then probably there might be some limit. So we can discuss that in detail if you reach out to our support. So the next question is like, how many dedicated phone numbers do you provide standalone features? So that, like, I think we have answered that. And since we are since you are the one who's like, I think we have answered this question as well. Yeah. Oh. So that's it from our side. Any more questions, guys? Good. That was a good set of questions, and hope you guys enjoyed the webinar. Like, and if you need more details, or if you want to try it out, please reach out support@testsigma.com, or like you can reply back to one of the emails that you might have received with this webinar confirmation. So that's it, Lavanya, from our side.
Thank you very much for joining and spending your quality time with us on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Lavanya, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us on a Saturday, and we'll see you in the next one. And it's happening the next month, so we'll keep you informed. Thank you, Mahesh, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Have
Bye.
a nice day and happy weekend.
And we'll send you a recording. Yeah.